There are still more than 2 weeks left in the year 2017, which means any attempt to summarize the year at this point will not only necessarily exclude 4% of it but will willfully ignore that 2 weeks of 2017 is basically the news equivalent of the 1950s. By the time this story is published, the country will experience, if 2017 keeps 2017ing, the same number of major news stories as we saw during the period of, say, January to July 1994. Nothing to do but embrace it. There's a great tool from the Internet Archive that catalogs the closed captioning from news programs every hour of every day. In other words, it allows us to generate actual data on the madness of the 2017 news year by network and day. So we did. Here, for example, is the chart for the word Russia when considered in the context of President Trump. In other words, this is how often 5 national news networks Bloomberg News, CNBC, CNN, Fox Business, Fox News, and MSNBC mentioned the Russia investigation on air. The data are presented as a percentage of all of the sentences spoken during the day, so if CNN is particularly verbose and CNBC generally quiet, the same measure of pervasiveness applies. The peak day was January 2, oddly, with Fox Business mentioning Russia in the context of Trump in more than 3% of its sentences. Overall, though, notice the 2 networks that mentioned it the most were CNN and MSNBC, with Fox News generally not mentioning it quite as much. Notice, too, the lull in September and October. That will come up again later. Discussion of the Russia investigation was pretty consistent throughout the year. Other subjects were more specific to certain moments. Like the Supreme Court, which was discussed heavily when Trump nominated Neil Gorsuch to fill the seat left open by the death of Antonin Scalia and the machinations of Sen. Mitch McConnell, R. Kentucky. He was nominated at the end of January, producing the peak on MSNBC, and confirmed in early April. The political conversation soon moved to the attempt to repeal Obamacare. The media had been talking about it consistently, really, spiking in late March when the House attempted to pass legislation overhauling the health care law. The subject spiked again during the summer, when the Senate nearly passed a measure that would have done the same. North Korea, too, was a constant subject over the course of 2017. The spikes below generally correlate to missile tests, as in mid-February. There's also a peak in August, when Trump disparaged its leader, Kim Jong-un, on Twitter. In May, mentions of the FBI spiked, as Bureau Director James B. Comey was fired and, a few weeks later, former Director Robert S. Mueller III was tapped to serve as special counsel to investigate Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Discussion of the FBI surged again in December, though to a lesser degree, as pressure mounted on the Bureau. Climate change was not discussed much on network news, with the exception of early June, when Trump announced he was planning to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. Notice this subject got a significant amount of attention on Bloomberg, which generally, given its focus on financial news, discussed major news stories less frequently than other networks.